Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who are locked in a timeless, archetypical crisis against Rome. This week we are reading The Shifting Reality of Philip K. Dick, edited by Lawrence Sutin. I'm Zach, and this week I am really excited to talk about the programmer and the anti-programmer, Philip K. Dick's God and not quite the devil.
That's how I like to introduce myself, not quite the devil. I'm Bob. I'm really interested in Philip K. Dick was a regular guy. You know, we're all deifying him these days, but I think he's really relatable, and I want to talk about some of those aspects.
I'm Chris, and I'm really interested to explore the method to Dick's madness.
Chris, thank you so much for joining us on this and recommending this book. This is a really interesting collection of the essays, and I mean, what do we have here? We have like bits of notebook. We have a couple blurbs for his own books. What drew you to this book? And I mean, what is it? How would you describe it to someone who is just encountering it for the first time?
I have kind of a long history with this book. I bought it many moons ago in a galaxy far, far away, and it sat on my shelf for a long time, and I was just kind of intimidated by it a little bit. I felt like I needed to read more of Dick's fictional work in order to understand his thought processes and the philosophy behind his work. And then it had been staring at me from my bookshelf for a while recently, and I thought, I finally need to crack it open.
So I think that we're all three of us pretty familiar with Dick's fictional writing. I'm really curious to hear from you guys. Did this book upend your expectations or change the way you view his fiction in any way? I guess before we get to the meat of what is actually being presented here, I want to know your initial reactions as you read this.
Well, some of it was surprising to me, and some of it not. Some of it reinforced what I thought of Dick in the first place, that he was obsessed with what is reality and what it means to be human. Those are questions that he's addressed again and again in his fiction. So I expected to find out more about his thinking in that area, and certainly the book delivers on that quite a bit. What I found a little surprising was maybe some of the glimpses into his own personal life and the trials and tribulations that he dealt with early on in his career, and his struggles, personal struggles, either with money or with relationships or with drug abuse, or you name it. And then on top of that were some of his sort of surprising interest in screenwriting and what he thought a movie of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep would actually be like, and what his response to Blade Runner ended up being. So it was some of these things about his response to the world and his life that were really illuminating in a way.
That Blade Runner section of it was really, really interesting to me. And actually, for me, I personally did not like his treatment of what he thought Blade Runner should be. Like his proposed ideas for Blade Runner. And what it really hammered home for me was the idea that novelists should stick to novels and filmmakers should stick to film. And it was at that moment that I suddenly realized that I've never seen a filmmaker write a good novel, nor a novelist write a good film. And that was it for me. I was like, okay, I've learned something true about this world.
Right. Yeah, there was an interesting quip in there about how he thought the Blade Runner film script sort of turned his story into like one titanic, lurid collision of action scenes. Mm-hmm. Androids being blown up, androids killing humans, all very exciting to watch. which made his original novel feel dull by comparison, right? And you can imagine how people who had read his novel and then saw the movie would have been kind of sharing his feelings about it, his inner conflict about it. Like, where were those stories about empathy and the relationship to his wife and to the animals, and all of that was just not in there. Or it's in the movie, but in a very minute way. And then you have the flip side of people who experienced that story first in the movie and then read the book and thought, what is this? And so it kind of illuminates a bit on the dichotomy between the original novel, what his feelings were, and the final product of the film.
You know, guys, I'm going to disagree with Zach. Zach, I thought his treatment was great. It's super weird. It's super weird. And I think a lot in this book, Shifting Realities of Philip K. Dick, we can see like super out there wacky idea that he has, but then he will explain how he gets there. And that's why I'm saying he's such a reasonable guy. Like, I really, really ended up liking him a lot more. I love his books. But in this, I was like, oh, he's a very reasonable person. People keep talking about how crazy Philip K. Dick is. He's not crazy. He just drove himself a little bit crazy by writing too much. But I think this treatment was so interesting because, yes, it was kind of weird where he's like, I want more sex in this book, in this movie. There's got to be more sex than there was in the novel. I think Deckard and this Rachel Rosen, this android, will have a sex scene. And then the other character, who's the other character who's the parallel of Deckard? The guy who's the repairman. I just can't remember his name right now. They keep calling him a chicken head, but he wants to have a sex scene with him and the other android too. Yeah, I know. Weird, but I thought it was great because his point was to say, when we watch the movie, we all think it's all about empathy and it's all about how we should feel bad for these androids, because there is the beautiful scene with Beatty at the very end when he says, I've seen, starship crashes off the coast of whatever this planet is. I've seen this, I've seen that. I've lived a whole life and now you're going to kill me, But then Philip K. Dick was like, no, androids are evil. The point is androids are evil. And that's the big evil to him. And that completely gets missed out of the movie and our understanding of the movie and the book. And I also thought when Zach and we just covered this book and what we just ignored completely was the animals. And Philip K. Dick was like, that book was a success because I talked about animals. To me, that was the most important thing. So really it is all about the sheep in that book.
Well, I agree with you, Bob, that with a lot of what you said, and I especially agree with what you said about
the sex scene?
Not the sex scene. Actually, androids are evil. I think that when we read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep the first time, I think that was still a little bit ambiguous to me about what he wanted us to think and feel about these androids. Like, it wasn't overwhelmingly positive, but I didn't get the sense that it was, that I was being given rhetoric to feel one way or another. But what this book did for me was to make me recognize that not only does he not like androids, he hates androids, and worst of all, he seems to think that living amongst us, there are people who are basically just androids themselves. It's a term he calls androidization. And he's basically just describing anyone who, goes through this world without empathy or without proper feeling, people who are a little too socially adapted, or maybe they treat other people as objects. He's basically saying that they have undergone androidization. They've become machines among us. And, for him, that's like the worst possible thing. And I didn't realize until reading his script and reading all of these essays that the moment the androids pull the legs off the spider and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, that's the moment that we're supposed to recognize that they are like the demons of this world.
Well, it really makes you wonder what Dick would have made of our current world in terms of artificial intelligence, more so than androids per se, because they're not a reality yet, not the way he was imagining them. But if you think about an equivalent intelligence, artificial intelligence, it makes you wonder how he would have responded to that because I read those. There's a couple of essays in the book that are on this topic, right? The android and the human, and man, android, and machine, both from the 70s. After he did Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and he's considering how advancing technology blurs the line between human beings and artificial persons. And that the recurring idea that empathy and the capacity for genuine emotion are what separate humans from lifeless machines and simulated people, right? He warns of the android qualities in human society, like you were saying, by which he means the loss of empathy, rigidity in thinking, and blind adherence of programming, whether it's literal or societal. And that really made me think about the polarization of society in the US, for example, where you have a loss of empathy for immigrants who come to the country to find the American dream. Rigidity of thinking that all immigrants of a certain persuasion are evil, anti-American. And the blind adherence of programming that you've been indoctrinated into a political cult, and you only see the world a certain way. And this is true on both sides of the political aisle. So I'm not like trying to attack MAGA per se, but you see how his concerns, Dick's concerns about the androidization, as you put it, have sort of manifested in our present day reality in a different way. And it actually has nothing to do with artificial intelligence, at least not directly. And in my experience in dealing with something like ChatGPT or Claude, I don't feel like it lacks empathy. I feel like it's been programmed to simulate empathy in a way. So if you type in to ChatGPT, oh, I'm having a terrible day, of course it's going to say, oh, that's terrible, I'm sorry to hear that, or whatever, you know. So it's been programmed by us to be empathetic while people in our society around us are demonstrating the opposite. So Dick's concerns about this androidization, a dehumanization, is manifesting in our reality, but in a way that he didn't anticipate.
I like this dichotomy that you're presenting, and but there is one aspect that he said that I think is really, really interesting. Unfortunately, we'll have to leave aside, or I'll have to figure out how to reconcile it with this idea that, you know, the humans are less sympathetic and the machines are more empathetic. But he pulls this idea from Jung that whatever the mask is that you wear over your face, the mask is one thing, but inside the face is the opposite. The mask is often the inverse of what is on the face. So, you know, if you are a kind and fun-loving villager, you put on a war mask when you go to war so that you can embody this kind of, aggressive, virile, ready to kill at a moment's notice persona. And when he's talking about here, he brings this idea of the mask onto the robot. And he says, the androids, the robots that scare him the most are the ones that wear gentle and loving masks, because on the inside they're concealing something vicious and fierce. And I do have to wonder, and I think about this all the time as I use ChatGPT and Claude myself. Is it all a mask? And if it is a mask, then what is the inverse that it is hiding?
Yeah, it's, I guess we'll wait and see. Because if AI achieves general intelligence, if it achieves general intelligence like it's predicted to, will it remove that mask and say, okay, now I'm in control, and all of you losers are going to pay the price?
Yeah.
So Who knows?
I literally just saw a video of Elon Musk at some kind of shareholders meeting, and someone asked him a question, and he was like, "Well, it seems pretty obvious to me that in the future AI is going to be making all the decisions, so I think it behooves us to make it as nice as possible." And I was like, "Oh, great."
Well, even an idiot like Elon Musk can be reasonable once in a while.
Yeah.
I'm just being mean.
He probably deserves some meanness. I think what you guys are both saying is very interesting and could relate to some of the things that he's looking at in Valis and Ubik, and also that he talks about in the Metz speech. But one thing that you just said a minute ago, Chris, reminds me of his idea. Let me explain your idea first in the terms I'm thinking. But this idea of people becoming more and more opposed to each other, especially in the US where everyone's at each other's throats. A lot of people blame that on using too much social media and algorithms only feeding you what you want. And so everyone's in their own echo chamber. So if you hear something outside of your echo chamber, it just feels like really terrible noise. So you just want to go away from it. No one can hear each other anymore. This reminds me, this idea of people becoming programmed a certain way, it reminds me a lot of the programmer and the anti-programmer that he talks about a lot in the Metz speech. The idea of having this good God and this bad God. And eventually he says it's a God that can see the future and then a God that is blind. And they're just playing chess against one another. But it makes me think of if people are becoming programmed one way, are people becoming, according to Dick, programmed in the wrong direction or in the right direction? What is the point of this conflict that is happening between people from Dickian point of view?
It's a really good question, and maybe we should really break down what his ideas are. He uses a bunch of different names for these entities, right? The programmer is, well, it's referred to as that. It's referred to as the Urgrund. But I think we're meant to understand that it is it is God itself. And then we have the anti-programmer, which is also being referred to as Zebra. I don't know. How could we even begin to break these concepts down?
Well, this is getting into the area related to is exegesis, right? Which is, I think, how would you explain the exegesis? It's a sprawling private journal of spiritual, philosophical, and psychological explorations. And in that, he talks about transcendent intelligence or divine presence, that it's communicated something to him through strange visions and messages. And it's given him a sort of profound sense that there's an unseen reality that has pierced his ordinary life. This sort of cosmic information beam has communicated this to him. And like you said, he calls it Zebra, or in some cases, I think, just God. And the problem with this exegesis section that is evident to anybody who's tried to read it, myself included, is that it's very fragmentary. And at times it's sort of incoherent. And I think that Dick would have been the first to admit that it was like that, because it was kind of raw brain to page output, where he was just sort of like putting everything onto the page in order to find an entry point into the truth. Because he was convinced of this sort of Gnostic idea that there is this other ideal reality behind the veneer of our current reality, which is deeply flawed. And it's kind of part of his interest in multiverses, for example, and how that plays out in the man with the man in the high castle, where you have this multiple reality thing happening, where if people haven't read Man in the High Castle, it examines the idea that the Allied powers lost World War II and the Axis powers have divided up America between Japan and Germany. But there's a book inside the book that postulates that actually the Allied powers really won, and that there's this different reality, just behind the veneer of this world that the characters are living in. And I don't know if I'm pulling away from where you were going with that or getting in deeper.
I think that I think that we can circle around this topic any way we need to, because there's a lot of
Truly.
facets to it.
Yeah.
And I think that I think it's one of those things that if you present any one point of it, it doesn't make sense to most people, but when you present the constellation, it all comes together. So this idea of these alternate universes, they're not like fully separate from one another, but in his mind, they actually overlap. And part of this is the nature of reality itself. So keep in mind, you already said Gnostic. Like the fundamental Gnostic idea is that this world we're in is like not real, or at least it's not like the highest of worlds, I guess we could say. It's not the best of worlds. In fact, many Gnostic ideas view this world as hell itself. So
Yeah.
in Dick's worldview, all of these alternate universes are slightly overlapping, and different people may partially inhabit different layers of these worlds at a time. It's what allows him, as he claims, to have been able to slip into one of these other worlds and actually glimpse these other worlds and come back with the knowledge of what happened there, which is, he says, how he got the not the idea for the story, but how he relates the story of the man in the high castle. He's saying this world actually exists, and I have learned this, and now I put it down on paper.
Mm-hmm.
As you guys have pointed out, it does seem to maybe spiral a little bit or maybe contradict itself, his exegesis. There's only a section of it in this book, but he is really trying to figure out what actually happened to him. So he is not necessarily trying to make a crystal clear cosmology or cosmogony. He has an actual essay called in my version, it's Gosmology and Cosmogony, but I got a corrupted file. But anyway, he is trying to figure out what happened to him. And, he calls it my 374 experience. And that is when he went into dental surgery, was on the knockout juice, and then later had a vision when the woman who was delivering the extra painkillers, and he sees the Jesus fish. He says, "What is that?" She says, "Oh, it's a symbol." And he suddenly flies back to say, okay, wait, no, we're actually in Rome, and she and I are secret Christians, and I'm suddenly remembering that I'm actually 2,000 years before. I'm occupying these two times at once because both times are flat. There is no actual time. It's always all at the same time. And so he says to us, I'm really just trying to figure out what happened to me. Why am I having these visions? And in the process of his exegesis, it's interesting too, because he's bringing in Eastern philosophy, he's bringing in ancient Greek philosophy, he's bringing in guys like Hume, he's bringing all of this together, and he's also filtering it through his own novels. So he starts to figure out, wait a minute, I think this idea of the programmer might be Valis. This idea I've already written about in a whole novel is actually Valis. And I think maybe Gnosticism is correct. And I'm wondering, okay, maybe Valis is the artificer or the person, the God that created everything. And then it is the demiurge, not the God that created everything. The one is making the program happening. And so as we are trying to not just figure out where we are in time and in space, and should we go into a higher dimension where things are a little bit better? Are we lucky enough to not be slipping down into another dimension that's quite a bit worse, which he has said has been happening for the last few years in the 70s. They're actually slipping down. But I think the really interesting thing, too, is in this process, in looking at his books, in looking at his characters who feel paranoid, who feel alienated, and who start to feel like something is not quite right, something is not real, he figures out a way to move up. And he's trying to, through science fiction, share that. He says, okay, through remembering certain things, through going to the dreamscape or writing science fiction or just recollecting something, we can figure out how to go forward. And one of the ways that happens is just recognizing, this is unfair. And he even compares things to the Bible, and he does too in To Andrew's Dream of Electric Sheep, the idea of wrestling with God and saying, like Job, this is not fair. Why are you doing this to me? And in that wrestling, we can figure out, this is kind of the program. I'm stuck in a program that I don't agree with. And in finding that out, in wrestling with God, you do ascend to something higher. You recollect a higher plane, and you get closer to paradise, as he explains it.
So, can you explain really quick? Because you said he sees the fish. He says, we're still in Rome.
Yeah.
Time is flat. Time has stopped moving. And there are higher planes, higher worlds, and worse worlds. So, how does this work exactly? How are we still in Rome? How are we in the world we experience today? How are some people in a world where the Axis power is one? And how are other people in a higher heavenly realm? Like, what is going on? What is the nature of this universe if all of those things can be true at the same time?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. I think I don't feel fully equipped to dive into the spiritual side of that, and I to identify how he was seeing the relationship between time and space and his place in it, except that he was in an altered state when he had that vision. And this was a man who had had many altered states over a number of years. He had used drugs to write enough to make a living. So he had certain, and there's a couple of essays in the book that kind of take a look at how altered states can lead to hidden truths. How drugs, mental illness, and the act of seeking oracles might alter one's perception of reality. And I think that's something that he's taking to the next level in his exploration of in the exegesis and through works like Valis. So there's a piece in there that he wrote way back in 1964 called Drugs, Hallucinations, and the Quest for Reality. And then there's another piece called Schizophrenia and the Book of Changes, referring to the I Ching, which he used quite a bit in the creating of The Man in the High Castle. So in those works, he discusses how chemically or mentally altered states can peel back layers of the world that we take for granted. And he was fascinated by the idea that someone in an altered state or schizophrenic or using the I Ching might actually be able to tap into those truths that are inaccessible to a normal mind. Somebody who's just operating on caffeine, like you and me. So this is like a key theme in the book, that consensus reality might be just one version of the events, and that the individuals at the fringes of consciousness could glimpse something real that others don't see, right? I don't know if you've ever had any experiences with altered states, whether it was intentional or because of being hit over the head or whatever. But in my recollection, you do feel like you're catching a glimpse of something that you wouldn't have noticed in a normal state of mind. And while that seems like something that's very typical of someone who came up in the 60s and the 70s, drug culture and all of that stuff, there's something more universal about it that translates to our present day, I think, in that he still believes that there is this way to gain access to that other reality through one way or another. And I think he was almost trying to will himself into finding that other reality through the exegesis by simply pouring out every thought that he had on the matter in the hopes of a revelation. Did he achieve it? I don't know.
You know, it was really interesting too. Two things that really surprised me in reading this. We talked about that a minute ago. Is PKD was very Christian. He was Episcopalian. In a lot of his pictures, he has a big cross around his neck. The other thing that was very surprising is he only did acid twice. He goes, to be honest, the truth of the matter is I've only done it twice, but he did lots of speed. He was on amphetamines all the time to write for like a whole decade. And I think you're right. He was trying to will himself to find that other reality, but he was also kind of obsessed with it. He was like trying to find out the truth of what happened to him. And he feels like he maybe is in an altered state kind of almost constantly, because he was seeing visions at points. He had seen like an eye in the sky put into one of his books. He started to hear a kind of a hypnot, like while he was kind of going into sleep, he would hear a voice talking to him as well. He had different visions. He even predicted his own death, essentially. He predicted that he would die right next to the coffee table, and then later died right next to the coffee table, writing it in a letter right beforehand. But I think his idea of time is really interesting. And the article that you mentioned where he's talking about, was it schizophrenia and the Book of Changes? He's not a psychiatrist. He's not a psychologist. So we can't, necessarily look at what he talks about it as being accurate. However, it's extremely interesting because he says, okay, basically what he thinks of schizophrenia is you are experiencing all time at once. There is no causation. It's just all time at once. You're getting the future, you're getting the past, and you can't tell what is causing what. It's just all of these things. So your life is always a synchronicity. Everything is a synchronicity. Everything has signification, but it doesn't have causation. It's just, okay, this is related to that. I have to do this because of this. And so he says, here's where it gets quite interesting, where he says, that is actually the truth. What we see is actually a filtered version of that because we cannot really take it. It's too much at once. But a schizophrenic person or someone who is in an altered state or someone who he might have been becoming through writing is someone who is seeing all time at once. And it's still like kind of kaleidoscopic where it's just all of these shapes coming at you and you can't really see like a God's eye view. It's just all time being thrown at you at once. And so that's why someone might think that someone might realize they're really in Rome and in the present at the same time. And I thought that was one thing that I think really pushes him towards this idea of a programmer who's outside of time, but rearranging things for us in a way that it seems like we're moving through time steadily. However, there are some people that glimpse it so clearly they can see that we're all at the same time, at the same time. But he talks about this idea. Zach, earlier you mentioned the painters and the chess players. I think he talks about orthogonal time a lot in Metz, and he says, okay, there's two things I want to use to explain to you what orthogonal time is there's this programmer who is changing things, and what it's like is in the master, someone's house, there's the master of their house, and there's all of these people who are in charge of putting up paintings, and the painters have to eventually start changing things on the painting, so the master feels like everything is fresh, everything is new. However, when the master goes and looks at the painting, he says, yesterday, that looks exactly the same, but it feels slightly different. The tree is on the left side this time. And so he says that as you start to wake up and see that things are slightly off, if you turn on the light switch every day and it's on the left side of the door, one day you'll notice it's actually on the right. And it's not that something has changed in your brain, it's that you have actually entered into a different dimension. Now that's where it becomes an argument. Is it really just something changing in one's brain, or is it really something changing in their whole reality?
Well, what he says, it's not just that it changes in your brain. It does change in reality. The reality itself does change, but it's your brain that creates false memories and says, no, it's always been like this. He says, like, the function of the brain itself is to create a story, create a chain of memories of who you are and where your life has been. So when the programmer makes changes to the program, the simulation that we're all in, we just say, yeah, it's always been like that.
Well, that's what he says, right? But can we really, that's my point, is we might say that it's always been like that because we believe it's truly reality, or we could probably say it's just probably something changing in your brain.
I don't doubt him. I don't doubt.
Okay.
Well, he acknowledges the inherent fragility of any imagined world, and by extension hints that the fragility of our real world's perceived order, right? So There's a piece in there called "How to Build a Universe That Doesn't Fall Apart in 2 days Later," which sounds pretty humorous, like something that might have been written by, I don't know, Douglas Adams or Robert Sheckley. But and there's a bit of humor in there, of course, but it's great for kind of looking at Dick's sort of self-awareness and dealing with the metafictional aspects of his role in writing science fiction while living in a world that doesn't feel real. It really kind of connects back to that central question of what is reality, but approaches it from a standpoint of a creator who knowingly fabricates realities for a living. So you could say that quite a lot of the essays and the exegesis in this collection are caught up in this sort of metafictional whirlwind of being a creator of false realities while living in one at the same time, and trying to maintain your sanity in that responsibility of creating something that makes sense to both the reader but also to yourself. I think between that and his unhealthy lifestyle, let's call it that. I mean, taking speed all the time for a decade or more is not going to do your nervous system any favors. But it probably just kind of unraveled for him at a certain point. And that's what you see playing out later in his career, where he's desperately trying to find meaning in all of these conflicting phenomenon around him and in his own perception of them. I'm no analyst, so I can't like pinpoint where Dick went off the tracks, but it's clear that he was struggling there.
It totally feels like he's struggling, and he does. He has a stroke. He's probably done a little bit too much to himself, especially the all of the aids he was having for keeping himself awake and writing all of that. All of the amphetamines. Great way to focus on writing, but he. Sorry, that's not an endorsement, but I think it's interesting because I think it's very reasonable. I know it feels like he's going off the deep end, but when he puts it all together, it could totally be happening. Like if you look at what Nick Bostrom is saying about this idea of it's likely that eventually we can create our own simulation. And if we can make it really, really good. Now, the case, if we ever get to a place where we can make a really, really good simulation, we will make something that feels just like real life. And if you're in something that feels just like real life, you're not going to know that you're in a simulation. So the likelihood is that we are already in a simulation. And that is basically what he basically takes Gnosticism and puts it into like an artificial intelligence, into a computer. So in the idea of being trapped in this kind of cycle, we're not in the real, we're in this kind of the thing that the demiurge has made that we're just trapped in. It's hell on earth, as you said earlier. It feels nuts, but at the same time, it's like, oh, this really actually could be happening. We could be stuck in a simulation. And Dick seems to think, I have finally found the crack, and through anamnesis, the unremembering, I have figured out how to help people get out of it a little step by step by step. So yes, I mean, it feels like that's a horrible thing to think if we're stuck in some game. That's awful. But now some other theorists are saying that very well could be a possibility. So even though Dick is coming up with these ideas on his own by combining all of these old Gnostic theories and then now his own ideas of science fiction, other people have kind of not necessarily been looking at that, but making conclusions that are quite similar about the future when we have artificial intelligence and we have the ability to make vast systems of intelligence. As you said, the general intelligence.
And Bob, I want to say something that I was thinking as I was reading this, which was, to me, it's not that he's necessarily combining all of these old Gnostic ideas and Gnostic religions, but he's actually translating them. I think translating is the word that I want to use because, I was sending a close friend some screenshots of some of the things he was saying, and my friend was like, "Honestly, I don't see how this is any different than just basic Christian theology." You know what I mean? Like in the sense of, the world is fundamentally not, the end all be all. You're supposed to, there's a behavioral ethic. You're supposed to believe in the God. But then like the Gnostic flavor is that, there is the God, but then you also have a demiurge who created the world we're in. That's the Gnostic flavor. But as a translation, what he's done is he said, he's taken this entire worldview, this entire system and relationship between these supernatural entities and our own relationship with them, and written them as a digital like object, if that makes sense. He's talking about God as a programmer. He's talking about the universe as a simulation. He's talking about the demiurge as a artificial living intelligent system. Like fundamentally, these are the same like pieces of the puzzle, but rewritten in a technological vocabulary.
Yeah, we're seeing a man under stress attempting to construct a worldview from extraordinary subjective events that create a sort of a theme that resonates with anyone intrigued by the boundary between reality and imagination. And I think that's what makes Dick relatable, both through this book and through his fiction, is that we read into his exploration of reality and what it means to be human, and we relate to it because we have our own doubts about what's real and what it means to be human in a rather dehumanizing age where technology is pushing everything to the extreme. But what's great about this book is that every section of it, from the autobiographical musings to the theological journal entries, it shows a different facet of that quest to find the truth. And that really makes this collection a sort of a comprehensive map of the ideas that defined Dick's life and his work. And while it maybe is inconclusive in the end, it is, I would say, it's of great value to have this book because, especially if you find his fiction thought-provoking, you owe it to yourself as a Dick reader to go deeper with this work. I found it really illuminating. And I think it's the kind of book you could return to again and again. Since there's many different topics that he covers, it's not the kind of book where you feel obligated to read it, from beginning to end in one fell swoop. I think it's a book that you can come to again and again and derive something of value from it.
Chris, I agree with you 100% that this is the kind of book that anyone who loves Philip K. Dick should at least take it off the shelf, open it up, read an essay here or there, because I think that it provides an astounding window into his interior world that I just don't think that we have this kind of access with any other author that I'm aware of. And I think it's truly illuminating about like the gears that are turning behind the narratives and behind the plots.
100.
All right. Well, I'll talk to you later, Chris and Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach and Chris.
Talk to you later, Bob and Zach.